Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 293, Learning to Stay, Mindfulness, Healing, and Emotional Resilience, my conversation with Derek Lakin. Well, today I'm really excited to have Derek Lakin, who is a mindfulness teacher and an awareness guide, whose personal story is a powerful reminder of what healing can look like. After facing years of deep depression and coming to the brink of ending his life, a last-minute referral to ketamine therapy, but combined with years of dedicated mindfulness practice, became the turning point. Derek not only found lasting relief, but also a renewed sense of self, purpose, and emotional balance. And now he helps others transform their lives through practical awareness tools that help them connect more deeply with themselves, which is what I really like, but also to make better daily choices and to create lives that feel authentic and grounded and full of possibility. Hello, confidence. Derek specializes, I think, in meeting people exactly where they are, especially those of you who struggle with anxiety, emotional overwhelm, or just the simple but profound challenge of being present with yourself. Because he has so much to share, I'm sure this will not be the last time I will have him on the show. So without further ado, here's Derek. Well, thank you, Derek, for making time today. I'm so excited to finally have you on the show, and I'm excited for our conversation and to hear about how you got into this work. Like, what was your journey? What would you like us to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I think, like most life journeys, my path to mindfulness has not been linear at all. And certainly there have been ebbs and flows, but I originally started practicing a little over 20 years ago when I bike a lot, and I noticed the flow state. I didn't have a word for it or a term for it at the time, but I noticed this mental space that I entered when on the bike. I wanted to learn how to move that off of the bike into the real world, and had no idea where I was going, bumped around a lot, ended up finding Buddhism. And then obviously mindfulness is a big part of Buddhism. Started visiting a couple of Zen centers and got a little bit more involved there. But I don't think that my mindfulness practice really took off until my father passed away in 2012. I write about this on my welcome page on Mindfulness Changes Lives, that was a really transformational time for me, because we always hear, especially in a lot of Eastern traditions, you can use death as a guide, and, our impending demise as a way to live. And it wasn't until I spent a couple of weeks with my father as he passed away from cancer, lying by his bedside, and he would get up in the middle of the night and cover me with a blanket. I would be laying on the couch next to his bed, and I would pretend to be asleep while he did that, because I didn't want to ruin the moment or interrupt whatever he was going through. But I understood at that point, from a very tangible perspective, the clarity that death provides us, and the crystal clear. I mean, everything else falls away, and seeing him do that in those moments really showed me what's important, and how death can whittle away everything else and leave us with what's actually important. So after his passing, I really launched out on my mindfulness journey and tried to figure out who I was, how I occupy this world, how I want to interact with this world, the things I want to leave to this world when I'm covering my own children who are laying next to my deathbed. So that was really kind of the launching point. I started experiencing some pretty heavy mental health challenges soon after he passed away. I think a lot of it was due to his passing away, and
Right.
we had a bit of a complicated relationship, and processing awareness, mindfulness helped me really lean into that and stop running from not just those negative emotions, but all of my negative emotions in general. And then the behaviors that come out of that running, alcohol, drug use, I mean, whatever it is, shopping, you can insert whatever you want.
Right.
Just something that I was finally willing to face myself. And there have been lots of ups and downs since then. And it certainly hasn't been linear. It certainly hasn't been pretty. It certainly hasn't been clean. It's been quite messy. But yeah, that's kind of where it landed me. And then, so in 2012, as part of my transformation, so to speak, I stopped doing work that I absolutely loathed and launched out as a freelance copywriter. I had no clients, no portfolio or anything. I just left it up to the universe and ended up building a pretty successful business until, what is this? This was last year. I freelanced for a while, then ended up in a couple of corporate positions and was laid off last year. And it was at that point I was like, I love writing. I don't know if I love copywriting anymore, but I still want to engage with the world through my words. So that's when I launched my Substack and really honed in on, clarified, I guess is a better word, how I want to help others reach similar levels of awareness, however they define their quote unquote best lives. So yeah, that's when I launched Mindfulness Changes Lives and went that way. And we'll probably talk about it here in a second, but it was originally named Ketamine Saves Lives. Ketamine therapy was another transformational moment for me or moments. And, but I found that I was mostly talking about mindfulness, how people can bring greater awareness to their daily lives. So in January, I rebranded as Mindfulness Changes Lives, and it seems to be resonating with a lot of people, which is really pleasant.
Right. And I can imagine, I mean, what you write there is so profound in terms of how you notice things and give voice to them with your writing, because it's beautiful writing, and what you're writing about, I think is something that people can really connect with in terms of their experience. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you're right about, death brings our awareness to its opposite, and the finality or the finiteness, I guess, of actually living. And until we embrace death anxiety, as my existential psych professor used to go on and on about, and his name was Dr. Doobie, no lie. And he was
Nice.
Dr. Doobie for sure. And he would just sit there and just want to talk about this stuff. But he was right. That until we embrace that, we can't fully embrace life. And how many of us run from the moment for very, very good reasons. As a therapist and a coach, I can tell you, for very good reasons.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think your work is so, so important, because then you are here to help people re-engage with the moment.
Mm-hmm. Now remember themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me also about your ketamine therapy journey, because as you and I were chatting about before, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. And I think there's a lot of things that people should know about it so that they can do it safely and get good results. Mm-hmm. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, I'll talk for an hour about this. So in 2023, I reached a crisis point with my depression, and I had some pretty debilitating ideation, and I was at my end. I was at my wit's end, and I expressed as much to my therapist, and she said, "Look, there's this great organization here in Colorado that they do physician-assisted ketamine therapy. They've had some fantastic success with people with lifelong depression like you. Just reach out to them. At the very least, it's just not going to help. It's not going to hurt you in any way, but just reach out and see what they can do." And as soon as I reached out to the physician who heads the program, she embraced, I feel, every part of me, and I felt almost cradled and understanding. And that immediately let me know that I was on the right path. So the therapies that I went through were all on site in a room. It's a very beautiful room set up with beds and cushions and beautiful artwork and all types of incense and different scents and different ritualistic items. And it was up in the foothills here in Denver, so you could look out the window and see the hills. It was really just a pleasant setting. And I had a physician assistant that sat with me throughout the whole thing. Her name was Brianna, and she talking about people's perceptions of psychedelics and using them for therapeutic purposes. A huge aspect of that, a huge aspect of the differentiator for me between those two is a guide, is having someone there to help you, not just during the experience itself, because they can certainly be challenging, but to help decompress you after the experience itself, to really help you integrate what you just went through into the greater picture. And then obviously, with your therapist doing greater debriefing after that. But I hear so much, a lot of these centers, I don't even know what you would call them, that people can go into and do like IV drips of ketamine. And they're basically put in the room. Somebody leaves, shuts the door, and they're on their own for the next hour. And
Great.
I absolutely reel at the possibilities for harm and danger in those situations. And I feel like centers like that, while they may have good intentions to bring this therapeutic molecule to different people, I think the capability for harm is just so much different there. But so, I had some great experiences. Ketamine is a lot different than other psychedelics because it's a dissociative. So I did intramuscular sessions, so they were quite powerful, quite quick. The onset was very fast, and reality would kind of just roll up on me, and I would be left in this place that I called the void, and it was just endless darkness. But also, it was a living contradiction. It was a place that was pitch black, but also filled with light, and it was vast, but also personal, just for me.
Wow.
It was terrifying, but also beautiful. I mean, it was all the things, but I don't know what happened to me in those spiritually, I guess, so to use a loaded term. I don't know what happened to me in the void, but it helped me reintegrate with myself. It helped bring back together a lot of shattered pieces that I didn't even recognize were shattered, things that had been disconnected from me for so long. I had forgotten that they had ever been a part of me. And the experiences themselves were one thing, but really for me was mindfully integrating the experiences day in and day out afterward. And I call them downloads, and they were just insights from the universe or God or whatever label you want to put on it. It was the universe speaking to me. And those were really what helped me move past my depression and move through my ideation. So that started in November 2023, and my last session was in January of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried different modalities. I did the intramuscular, and then I did just the oral lozenges at home. And I certainly found the intramuscular in the facility, that setting was much more powerful and much more bountiful, I guess. There was so much more richness to the experiences just because I had another guide with me. But it was interesting because in January, I did my last session in office, and it came away a bit flat. And it took me, I was hurt and I was scared that I was no longer going to get these downloads. And I felt a little bit abandoned by the molecule. I know there's no, there's some personification there, but,
Right.
But I realized after a lot of meditation and sitting with those feelings and really unpacking them, I just understood that ketamine told me, look, I've shown you all that I can show you. Now it's your turn to integrate. And
wow.
Yeah, it's been beautiful. And so many other people that I talk to online are like, aren't you just taking a horse tranquilizer, or aren't you just, getting messed up and going and laying somewhere and having a blast. And I think any kind of psychedelic, whether it's ketamine, DMT, psilocybin, it's all in the approach, and it's all in the reverence that you pay to the molecule. Because if you go into it just looking to have a good time or whatever, you're missing 80% of what these molecules can provide to us.
Mm.
And I find that when we go to a physician-led facility like that, they really help us approach these molecules from a place of reverence and from a place of integration and from a place of wholeness. And that's why, ultimately I'm back in school because of these experiences to eventually become a psychedelic therapist myself. I mean, to say that it changed my life would be a vast understatement. It's just a beautiful thing. And I want to help bring that to other people.
Wow. What a wonderful story. And thank you for clarifying, especially through your own experience, how important it is to get to the right kind of place where people are well trained and they walk through it with you and guide you. Because I've had the experience of sitting with clients where they went to the wrong place and they were a mess.
Yeah.
And I felt so bad for them. And so I really caution my clients that, make sure you go to a place where they know what they're doing and they're doing it the right way. And the integration piece is really, really important, because I also have had a handful of clients recently who have had an experience similar to yours, and it's done amazing things. And so what does ketamine do inside the brain? Like, what happens there?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on that by any means, but based on the limited amount I've read, ketamine is different than a lot of other psychedelics in that it acts on the glutamate receptors in the brain.
Okay.
So it actually promotes neuronal growth. So this is a gross oversimplification. So let's say you have a stimulus, and then that stimulus immediately triggers a memory, let's say of a bad memory or a depressive memory or whatever you want to qualify it as. Ketamine with integration helps you basically reroute your neuron around that memory, right? So instead of, you can now associate a stimulus with something completely different, with something that's healing, instead of previously you might have associated it with something negative that might have sent you, or me, let's talk about it, like into a depressive crisis. That's about the extent of my knowledge about how ketamine works. But I mean, they're all phenomenal molecules, but ketamine especially just shows so much promise. And it's interesting that ketamine, because even within the psychedelic community, ketamine often it's kind of like the redheaded stepchild, because it's not natural. It's a man-made substance.
Right.
And like I said, it's functionally different than any other psychedelic molecule that we know about. So it's been interesting, even just over the last year and a half, seeing people kind of reawaken to it and distinguish it from like a party or a pub drug, into something that can actually transform lives.
Wow. Thank you for that explanation, because it really is a great way of describing how it can help people. Because that's what people wonder, well, how can it help me? Right. And it really can. It's changing the brain.
Yep.
And I think all the neuroscience that's out there now is going to back this up more and more as we go, is my guess. So thank you for that. And that is really, really important.
Yeah.
Especially for folks who tried EMDR. EMDR can't work they're not ready to. A lot of clients have told me, yes, I know EMDR works, but I'm just too terrified, and they just won't do it. And so this is another avenue for them, which is really, really powerful. So
yes,
thank you for sharing that, because I think the more guidance and education that people have, the better decisions they can make for themselves. And, what we do know is talk therapy is not going to hit on everything, and it's not going to help everything. And it can't. And the field is finally admitting that, which is really great.
Yeah.
It's there. It has its purposes. But I think it's an and both. And we need other things as well.
I agree. Yeah.
So you also said the mindfulness piece is really important as well in your journey. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does it look like? Like you and I talked about, it can be so misunderstood, right?
Yeah.
So how do you want to describe it?
Yeah. I mean, mindfulness is just present moment awareness, but it's so much more than living inside the present moment. It's exploring it. A lot of people think that mindfulness or awareness is kind of a passive process. You just sit and watch the present moment and that's it. And it's not that at all.
Right.
Awareness is engaging with the present moment. I call it the STE feedback loop, sensations, thoughts, and emotions. So when we experience some stimuli out in the real world, we can take a step back, live in that space, as Frankl said, between stimulus and response, and explore it. Why am I feeling this way? What am I feeling? A lot of times we're so disconnected from ourselves that we don't even know that we're feeling a certain way. And then when we recognize that we're feeling a certain way, we can explore its nuances. We can really dive into it, really lean into it. And once we spend so long, like I talked about earlier, we build a life full of distractions so that we can not feel these things.
Right.
And once we gain the courage, because it does, I'm sure you've experienced this a lot with your clients, it takes immense courage to stop running and to face whatever we've been running from. But once we get that courage, we quickly find that it's ether, right? It's a ghost. It's something that we have made up in our mind that we're afraid of. And when we can face it, we recognize that we are the creators of our own suffering. We are the creators of these ghosts that live in our head and try to guide our life. And awareness, present moment awareness is just doing just that, bringing awareness to what's going on in your mind and how that interacts with your body.
I've been thinking a lot about in recent years, how, yes, people running from the moment for very good reasons. The moment wasn't safe. And they've even disconnected from that, right? It's wild, the disconnect, the disowning of the self, putting those parts over there, so to speak, is for survival. And I tell clients, thank God you did that, because I don't know where you would be. You might not even be here, literally. And so it's really about re-owning and getting back in the moment. But the other piece too is you're getting out of your limbic system, because in order to be mindful, you have to use a different part of your brain. You have to engage the prefrontal cortex. And so what we do know, and I'm an NLP practitioner, and we had to do a lot of, which was great. We had to do all the exercises ourselves. And as skeptical as I was some years ago, it really worked. And I've had some of my own trauma of things happening, and I've done some of these exercises, and it amazes me. And so, but the other piece that I'm kind of pondering is, not only are you using a different part of your brain, but aren't you less of a hostage? In your limbic system, it's all fear, fear, fear. That's all it is.
Yep.
Fear and protection, fear and protection. And you're so disconnected from the self that I imagine as you practice awareness, don't you re-own the self? I mean, isn't that where all the empowerment is?
Absolutely. That's beautifully said. I think these protective mechanisms that we build to keep ourselves safe, eventually we reach a point where they no longer serve us, right? They no longer serve who we are, who we're becoming. And when we learn to face them and face the fear that comes along with them, that fear just melts away, because we recognize that these are not monsters that we've built. They are protective mechanisms. And when we re-own our awareness and everything that trickles down from that, we can face those things and thank them for their protection and thank them for doing what they did for however many years or decades, but also tell them that they are no longer needed, right? Thank you for your service, but I'll see you on the other side, kind of thing. And it's like you said, it's taking ownership, taking our agency back. And that's really what mindfulness is regaining your agency over every aspect of your life.
Right. Which is why it's like one of the biggest things for trauma that's being, recommended. And then also too, can you talk about, and this is for me mainly, is that, because my guess is that, actually, what I believe is there's nothing better than experiential data. Like, it won't lie to you, right? Because your subconscious is crossing its arms. It's like, really, dude, prove it to me. prove it to me that I don't need all these protective mechanisms, because I ain't letting them go until you prove it to me. And so that is why I also believe that, just doing a little bit at a time and desensitization is amazing for fear. So mindfulness in very small increments, is that when you work with people around this, or how do you work with people around that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. Kind of again, why I often balk at using the term mindfulness, because it's so loaded and people often associate it with, monks sitting in caves for decades. And it's not that at all. It's not. Present moment awareness does not have to be some esoteric, complicated, ritualized process that you have to sit for 3 hours every day in your bedroom to get any kind of benefit out of it. In my experience, certainly bumping around a lot and making tons of mistakes over the years, but my experience ultimately boils down to, 10 minutes a day is great. Even if you're more of an advanced practitioner, you can still get an awful lot of benefit out of 10 minutes. And it also really opens the door to someone who is just dipping their toes into the field of awareness, and that you don't have to do these marathon sessions. I mean, if you can only sit for 2 or 3 minutes, then that's what your body brings, then that's fine. That absolutely works. But I think even more than that is that awareness or mindfulness it's often looked at as like some kind of cloistered practice where it's only available to us in controlled settings on the cushion in our bedroom. And it's not at all. Certainly that's where I help. If a beginner comes to me and is looking to get into it, certainly that's where you remember that state. You get back into that mental state, is in those controlled circumstances. But very quickly, we can move from those controlled circumstances out into the real world in chaos. And that's really where mindfulness, I think, transforms not just our life, but everyone's lives that we interact with, because it gives us the opportunity to step back from whatever we want to react to and say, look, I don't have to react that way. I don't have to react in these behaviors that have kept me held back for years or decades. I can choose a different way. And even just that, that millisecond of a pause, that's all it takes to transform how we react to different situations around us. And in that reaction, in that space to decide our reaction, is all of our power. Wow. That's really where we have control over very few things in our life, despite what our ego wants us to believe. Right. We have control over very little. And perhaps the biggest thing that we do have control over is how we react to the world around us. Present moment awareness helps us react or respond from a place of authenticity instead of knee-jerk learned reactions that have, kept us safe for decades.
Exactly. And then gotten in the way of all the wonderful things that we want, right? Respect, great relationships, confidence, not having panic attacks. And so, yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. And I just think too that you're changing the brain as you're doing that as well. It takes a while. Yeah. It takes a while to build new neural pathways when we're older, right? But we do that and you just practice and practice. But I also think, again, back to that experiential data, the more you do it, the more data you gather. Like, wow, this feels a hell of a lot better. Or I feel less anxious and traumatized when I'm not in fight or flight and I choose how I want to respond to this person. My confidence builds. I eventually connect. I eventually feel safer going out the door, right? And engaging in life and all those things. And I think just all of that data, your subconscious is really just weighing it.
Yeah.
And that contrast, like you talked about, between, being afraid and avoiding and running from the moment and disconnecting from the self versus learning how to really be in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's like a combo, I think, of your brain feeling better, but also your mind, your self-perception, feeling capable, like getting back to being a 4-year-old, right?
Absolutely, 100%. before the world taught us who we weren't, right?
Right. Because 4-year-olds know exactly who they are and they have no problem
Exactly.
telling you.
Yep.
Wow. So when is mindfulness not recommended for someone? Like, are people in a space where it wouldn't work for them?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the biggest things that I try to emphasize to the people I work with is that mindfulness is not a panacea. I mean, it's not something that is going to solve every one of your problems, and it's not right for everyone. Certainly if everyone brings to their practice what they're willing to face. Some people are in a place where they can go much deeper. They're willing to face, they're willing to let the things that no longer serve them know that it's no longer serving them. But for a lot of people, they're still hanging on to those things. Those things very much help them get up in the morning and navigate throughout the day. And in those instances, I think mindfulness can still help, but it needs to be approached much more surgically.
Okay.
We don't want to start ripping down someone's scaffolding if there's nothing in its place, right? We need to slowly build a scaffolding alongside their old scaffolding so that we can then dismantle the old and step into the new. And then certainly people experiencing mental health challenges, psychosis, schizophrenia, those typically are not good for mindfulness. It's just not, their brains are wired differently. And I'm not saying that it can't be approached positively from people experiencing those things, but it needs to be done much more, again, surgically. I think in those instances, I would perhaps hand off their growth to someone who is, like a licensed therapist, or, someone who is much more able to engage with mental health challenges. And a lot of the times that is certainly something that I talk to clients about at the beginning, in that there is so much overlap between present moment awareness and mental health. And while I might be qualified to help people with their mindfulness challenges, and certainly that leaves a little, maybe a little bit of overlap there into the mental health area. Once it leans hard into that mental health, then that's where we need to engage the help of a professional.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because they might not be ready to sit with what is.
Right.
So people really should be approaching it probably after having done some therapy, having done some trauma work.
Absolutely.
But still have a problem in their day-to-day of being present.
Yep.
Or when it gets too stressful or an event happens and they're so anxious. They have to go perform, they have to go do something, and they have a brand new job. They have to confront someone. And so that anxiety, and I can imagine people come to you who do suffer with anxiety and panic attacks, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the most common things. 100%. Yeah.
Can you give us just briefly a sense of how you would work with someone around that using mindfulness?
I think regardless of whatever challenge someone's facing, whether it's, anxiety or fear or PTSD, again, there needs to be a balance between my help and a professional's help. But I think it all comes down to the same thing. It's just, it's leaning into whatever we've been running from. So if it's anxiety, let's figure out what's really causing that anxiety. So,
Right.
Oftentimes if we're anxious about giving a presentation, it's not really the presentation that we're anxious about.
Right.
It's about looking foolish in front of others, or a million other different things that our ego doesn't like. So oftentimes it's about just leaning in, having the willingness to lean into those uncomfortable sensations and figure out what's underlying them. What's the recipe that's making the meal, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, that's really, again, regardless of what challenges someone is facing, is just to do that, just to face it, to lean into it.
And that makes them use a different part of their brain. And, years ago, a very controversial therapist, William Glasser, had this choice theory. He pissed a lot of people off because people will come in and he'd be like, so let's have a panic attack right now, right? Or why are you choosing to be depressed? I mean, has its place. But what was fascinating to me is now the neuroscience is here to back him up, and at least in terms of anxiety attacks, because once you start thinking about, here, let me have a panic attack, you're already in charge.
Yep.
But it's the perception that the anxiety is bigger than you, and then that anxiety compounds. That's where the problem is.
Yeah.
Right? That I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe.
Yeah. And a lot of the times, like we were talking about earlier, is once you actually lean into that anxiety or whatever else it is, you find that it's a ghost. It's, it's something that is very real and it affects your life. I don't want to ever discount someone's actual lived experience. But at the same time, kind of like what you're alluding to with Glasser, is that we're responsible for it, right? We have relinquished our responsibility to it, even though we're responsible for it. So just leaning back into it and reclaiming our agency is what it's all about.
Yeah, which is really wild and so needed and necessary these days. I think there's so much anxiety out there in the world. There's a lot of trauma. And there's a lot of micro traumas, like getting up in front of people. Small T trauma can be debilitating in lots of ways, just like big T trauma can. So I think your work is so important.
Absolutely.
And so, Derek, if people want to come work with you, which I'm sure they do after listening to you today, how can they reach you? What is the best way to connect with you?
You just go to mindfulnesschangeslives.com. And that's where I actually host my Substack as well. So you can read all of my articles. I've got a how-to guide for anybody that's looking to just get started into mindfulness. I have a free worksheet that helps people. It's called the Mindful Moment Worksheet. And really, it's just about taking 60 seconds, micro mindfulness, so to speak, and learning the power of just those short bursts of mindfulness. And they can also learn about the 12-week program as well.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you again for being here. I'm sure I'm going to bug you to be back on the show sometime soon because there's so much more to talk about. But thank you so much.
Thank you. I would love that.
Well, thank you, Derek. Again, that was wonderful to hear just the words of a teacher and a learner and someone who I think is so well equipped to help you learn how to get present and get in touch with your real self. If Derek's story resonated with you and you're curious about how mindfulness can help you reconnect with yourself, help you regulate your emotions, and just find more meaning in everyday life, make sure you check out his website, mindfulnesschangeslives.com. He's got a great course going on over there, and he does beautiful one-on-one work with clients. And I think he's just such a warm, knowledgeable, and safe person to gently guide you into greater awareness and lower stress. So check him out. There you're going to find some really great step-by-step resources, some guided meditations, and one-on-one support. So make sure you check him out. Okay, so thank you for hanging out with us today. I hope this was helpful. And please, please pass this episode along to others who may struggle with overwhelm, anxiety, like who isn't these days, right? Or people who have had some trauma in the past, have panic attacks, have anxiety, all the things, and need to learn to reconnect. Okay, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.